Rob Wallbridge has been the member relation manager for Organic Meadow for over a decade and has helped many of our organic dairy farms with transitioning, with ongoing issues over the years. Rob currently works for Thompson's as an organic crop specialist. Let's welcome Rob Wallbridge.
Yeah, looks good. Second work. Can I take this out? Or not?
It's probably not a good idea unless you wander around here.
Well, I was going to wander around.
All right. Then I have to pin this wireless mic.
Well, I can stay here. All right. Well, yeah, I'll try to get through. I've got half an hour to go through quite a bit of information. Yeah, that was good. Okay, so I was asked here today to talk about the numbers, and I don't know whether that's going to keep you any more or less awake than talking about omega-3s and omega-6s, but it's been great to hear why we should be producing organic milk, and I guess I am here to tell you whether or not you can make money doing it. So we're going to talk a little bit about numbers, what the numbers tell us, what the numbers don't tell us, and then go kind of a little bit beyond the numbers if I can find time in the next half hour to do that. If you have questions at any point, feel free to throw up a hand or shout at me, and I will either answer them or tell you to be patient. So these numbers are from a benchmarking project that Organic Meadow did in cooperation with the Profit Profiler program run by DHI at the time. And it covers data from 2011 and 2012. We got funding from the Agricultural Management Institute to do this. So basically, Profit Profiler looked at 39 key indicators, economic benchmarks on dairy farms, gathered actual cost of production data from those farms. We had 30 organic farms participate in the project. Again, like I said before, it was 2011, 2012 data. At the time, the organic dairy premium was about 18% over conventional, and I just put in some references there as far as grain values as well. So organic corn at the time was worth about $12 a bushel, and organic feed beans were around $24.50. So pretty close to current values. Current numbers may be a little bit lower, but they're pretty comparable. So what we found, like Arden just mentioned, milk production on organic farms is lower. It's about 66% of the average conventional farm at 20 liters per day. Part of that can be attributed to the fact that the organic farm, organic industry in Ontario does tend to have more of the smaller breeds, Jerseys in particular, so that is a bit of an impact there. And you can see too the average butter fat at 4.1% is a little higher. 49 cows per herd, again, is a little bit smaller than the conventional average. And the other big factor was that organic farms on average fed 836 liters of milk to calves before they were weaned. The average age of weaning on the organic farms at that time was 16 weeks. So any questions on that kind of just the context, the baseline data there? So now we get into a little bit more results. I'm not sure how well they're going to show up for you at the back. But I guess the bottom line, essentially forage costs were significantly lower on organic farms on a per acre basis, as well as the forage cost as a percent of the total milk revenue was slightly higher on organic farms. again, bearing out the fact that organic farms tend to feed higher levels of forage. Again, grain costs were lower both on a per acre basis, on a cost of production basis, as well as on a percent of revenue basis. Organic farms tended to spend about 12% of their revenue on grain, whereas conventional farms averaged anywhere from 17.5% up to almost 19%. Now I should point out too, this range for conventional farms, what we did is we compared the 30 organic farms in our study against 3 separate data sets of conventional farms. The Profit Profiler program basically allows individual farms to benchmark themselves against groups of other farms, and in the conventional sector there were enough farms participating that they were able to then subdivide those farms into different groups. And so the 3 groups that we used as comparisons for the organic group were groups with low production, smaller farms, and then we also did a comparison against all the farms that participated in 2011. So I think at that time there were 55 conventional herds that had 2011 data in the program. So that's, and they, if you look at those, they all tend to be on the higher side of the range. So, that group of 55 as a whole would have had the higher costs for grain and forage, and the higher percentage of grain as a percent of revenue. So if we look at kind of the bottom line there, so looking at all costs as a percent of revenue, organic farms were spending just under 80%, whereas conventional farms were spending 84.4 to 87.7% of their revenue was going to cover cost. EBITDA as a percent of sales, so that's earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. It was 35.4% on organic farms. Conventional farms tended to range in the 30%. So we can see essentially at the end of the day, yep.
The forage cost, is the acre price or the rental price included in that?
There would have been, land costs would have been factored in there.
That's factored in.
Yeah. Either owned or rented.
Yeah.
Any other questions on those numbers? Essentially what we're looking at here is the fact that, you know, given the organic premium at the time, organic farms tended to be slightly more profitable than conventional farms, so there's definitely an economic case to be made for organic production. If you look at it a little bit, I guess to put in a little bit more context, we also assumed that the farms that were participating in the conventional Profit Profiler program, the conventional farms that were participating probably tended to be, well, they tend to be larger farms to start with. They tended to be a little bit more, you know, progressive, profit-oriented. So you're probably looking at, you know, kind of probably the more efficient, more profitable farms as a whole, and comparing the organic farms against those. The other interesting thing that came out of there, vet and breeding costs on organic farms tended to be about a quarter of what they were on conventional farms. But organic farms tended to carry a higher debt load per kilogram of quota. The other interesting aspect of fuel use per unit of production was quite similar on both farms, both types of farms. And that we realized was largely attributed to the fact that a lot of tractor time on conventional farms is actually spent in the barn, so, or on, you know, mixing TMR and this type of thing. So whereas the organic farms probably spend more time in the field, for weed control and that type of thing in their crops. On conventional farms, those tractors actually spend a lot of time running in the barn, whereas the organic farms, the cows are out there doing some of that work themselves. Now, of course, the other thing to keep in mind when we're looking at these numbers is the problem with averages. You can take, the situation pictured here, and if we took the average of that, we'd say that everybody was perfectly happy. If you start looking at the details, you realize that the reality is not quite that. And that's what we also realized, doing this study. There were a wide range of numbers for organic farms. Yep.
Why would organic, the debt load be higher? Like, how is that? How do you explain that?
That's a really good question. I don't have a good answer for that. I think in some cases there may have been farms that were had made investments in upgrading facilities or that type of things recently, so that that may have had an influence. But I don't have a good answer for that question.
I just wondered, this is third class, what are they clear? All costs. What's all included in that? What your last year?
Yeah.
Second class, 80%. Really is the cost of food cost.
Yeah, so that would have been, again, crop costs, feed costs, replacement costs for the livestock, and as well as a labor and management cost, debt and depreciation. So essentially, everything. That profit profiler program really goes into depth on the entire financial aspect of the operation. This is the other thing to realize too. A lot of the organic farms tend to have what's termed a forced labor cost. So instead of hired labor, they rely more on family labor. And so you're actually, and I'm not going to comment on whether that labor is actually being paid out at the full rate to the kids that are doing it, but it's actually counted as a cost in the program. So we can say that some of that labor cost is staying on the farm.
Just put it in simplified form. So if you on that second last line, all costs is percentage of the revenue.
Yeah.
So if you threw $100,000, that's what you took in. You're going to pay tax as an organic farmer on 20% of that. That's what the Revenue Canada would look at. So you need.
That's right.
Okay, I'm just putting it in perspective here. So to be just above the poverty line, you need $100,000 worth of revenue just for one person. I'm just trying to put it in perspective as far as with the tax thing and that kind of thing. You've included everything.
And that's also labor costs. I mean, you're paying your own labor there as part of that 80%. Interestingly, at the time, we pulled the organic premium out of there, and without the organic premium, the total cost came in at about 89%. I guess the other comment that I'd make here too was that, there's the assumption that high grain costs, basically eat up all the profit on an organic dairy farm. But, what we found here was that, in reality, because the organic farms are relying a lot more on forage, then that's compensating for that, the extra money that they are spending on grain is canceled out by the fact that they're feeding a lot less grain. So So to get back to this idea of averages and the ranges that we saw, kind of based, my observation over the years, you're kind of looking at three, broadly speaking, three different models of production. And I wouldn't say that every farm is always going to fit into one of these three, but generally speaking, you've got some farms are practicing a high input, high output model, and so they are investing more in buying in grain. They're usually working with some pretty high-end genetics for the cows, and they're getting a lot of milk out of those cows. And that works. It tends to be, again, in my experience, tends to be, younger farms or farms that are, looking at expansion or looking at, bringing in the next generation, a little bit more aggressive in the management. And so that works as a model. The high input or low output model isn't one that tends to last for long. But I have seen farms, try that out, and often it's, farms that are newly transitioned and they're still in that input substitution mindset where they're okay, this is how much grain I fed when I was conventional, this is how much grain I'm going to feed when I'm organic. These are the inputs that I bought when I was conventional. I'm going to go out and find organic equivalents to these inputs. And it just, in an organic system, it just doesn't work. And you really have to, take a different approach and think through things in a different way in order to make them work in an organic system. So you've got to take a step back and say, okay, how do I design a system to avoid problems? How do I design a production style that takes advantage of, what we're working with the organic standards in order to optimize production under this style of management. You can't just take a conventional management style and overlay it onto an organic farm, because you tend to run into problems. The other model that's quite common out there is the low input, low output model. It has advantages. It's a low risk model. Focuses on cost control. It works well for farms that aren't carrying it, don't have to service a lot of debt. Tends to be relatively low maintenance. I mean, you still have to put the management effort in, but it does tend to be economically sustainable. My only concern about that is, if you're looking at bringing in another generation, are you generating enough cash flow to make that work? Are you generating enough cash flow to maintain and improve on the facilities and the equipment? So that's the only caution I would take on looking at that model. So I guess I wanted to kind of end, and I was hoping to leave some time for questions, just with, again, based on my experience, a few strategies that I've found that the more successful organic farms tend to employ. And number one is a focus on the forages. And that, again, grain is expensive, so the more you can get out of forage, the further ahead you're going to be. A lot of farms, a lot of conventional farms, I think, and thinking back to my own experience growing up on a dairy farm, the hay was kind of the forgotten crop, and the pasture even more so. The farm I grew up on, the pasture was just the field that was too hilly and too rocky to plow, and so the cows went out there and did their thing, and we didn't really worry too much about it. But I think if you're going to be a successful organic farm, you've got to treat your pasture and your forage with the same level of attention and the same level of management, as any other field crop, because that's where you're going to be making the money. That's where the cow's diet is going to be focused on forages, and so you really have to give it the attention it deserves. The second point here, yep.
Ron, what about the risk factor, like organic farm, pasture dry summer? How do you put a number on that?
A number on it in terms of.
You know, if conventional versus organic, we have a dry summer line feed. I mean, pasture dry now, substituting feed. I hear those things more and more coming up in the States, those types of scenarios. And I don't really know how to put a factor on that, because you make it look like more economical to the organic farm, right? Versus conventional, for your study here.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I do think that you do have to acknowledge that there are higher risk factors for sure. I think that's true, you know, organic production across the board, and I like to think of it as one of the reasons that organic farmers earn a premium for their product is because they are taking on more risk to do so. Yeah, it's just like you say. It's not as, you know, if you run low on pasture, low on feed, it's not as simple to go out and find, you know, and buy more at the local feed mill. It requires a lot more work and a lot more risk to do it in an organic system. Yeah.
In your first sheet, you said you had the acre cost included in your forest cost. Does it include the yield too? The amount of acres you need to supply field and forest?
Yeah, and the just looking at it here, there are, yeah, like the forage acres per cow on the organic farms, the average was 3.3 acres per cow. On the conventional farms, that ranged from 2 to 2.5.
And these extra costs are included in the study because you have 50% more acres for this.
Yeah, I mean that would have been factored into either the feed costs or the overhead cost. I think the other factor too is, again, coming back to the forages, you know, organic protein is really expensive. The organic farms that I see succeed are the ones, again, that are looking for high protein levels in their forages, so they're getting out there and harvesting, you know, when they need to harvest the forage, and you know, the field crops usually take a back seat to making sure that the forage gets off in time and in excellent quality. If you're going to buy grain, it's usually more economical to buy energy than to buy protein in an organic system. Number 4, invest in your soils. Yeah, and as Arden has been saying all day, you know, nutrition is everything to a cow. And if you're growing and raising most of your own feed, which if you're going to be profitable as an organic dairy farm, you're going to have to focus on doing just that, then all the nutrients for those cows are coming out of your own soil. And so you've got to be willing to invest in that soil and make sure that it's supplying the nutrients that the cows need. The soil is really the basis for that nutrition, which is everything for the cow and everything for the people who are consuming the products. So you've got to go back and you've got to start with the soil. Eliminate mental compaction. Again, that's what I was talking about earlier. You know, just taking a step back, looking at things from a different perspective. Has anybody figured that thing out yet? No, that's.
I've got a winner.
Oh, you do? Okay, yeah. You know, that is exactly that, is about thinking outside the box. And the last point I want to make is the importance of building a community. And I think, you know, here today, listening to somebody like Arden is a fantastic opportunity to learn. But I think even more important is the chance to actually gather together and talk with your friends and neighbors and other people who are trying to do the same thing and be successful in organic dairy. That's where so much learning takes place. Organic farmers don't tend to have the same resources available to them, and so they have to, we really have to rely on each other for that kind of knowledge. And so again, I would urge you to really build networks and build communities, talk to each other about what's working on your farms and about what's not working too, because you're going to learn from your mistakes and hopefully help other people learn from your mistakes too. Any other questions? I'm just about out of time.
Over here.
Oh, sorry, who was first?
Do you have any numbers specifically on the chart that stated that there was more debt per kilogram quota? Do you know kind of what, like, specific numbers on that?
Good question. I'm not I could look them up. Debt, yeah, okay. So, debt per kilogram of fat, $58.79 on the organic farms, and it ranged from 51. Yeah, I see $47 to $51 was the range on the conventional farms.
It's $1 per kilogram of fat sold? Was that figured?
That was debt per kilogram of fat. I would say, assume, yeah. So that would be quota owned.
Yeah, it should be about like 30,000.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I'd have to dig deeper into the numbers here to figure that out. Yeah, that's a good point, Bill. And I don't know. I'd have to dig deeper to figure that out.
Maybe you can present that as soon as I'm done. Everybody wants to know that.
Thank you, Rob. That was for your very insightful talk.